Okay, so without further ado, I'm pleased to welcome Sian Morgan. So Sian, if you'd like to come on camera now and unmute yourself.
Hello.
Brilliant. Hello. So Sian,
hi everybody.
Hello. So Sian is going to be talking to us today about progression by design. And Sian is a senior research manager at Cambridge University Press and Assessment. So without further ado, I'll hand over to you.
Okay, so can everybody see my slides?
Not yet.
Oh, right, there we are.
Need to do a share screen.
Oh, yes. Okay.
Lovely.
All right, everyone. Okay, hello everybody, and thank you for coming to this session today. I'm going to talk about how Cambridge English exams can help students and teachers create a virtuous circle of learning, goal setting and motivation. While you're listening to the talk, please feel free to type any questions and comments you may have into the chat book or the question and answer, and there will be time at the end to answer some of those. So to start with, could you let us know where you're watching from? I think some of you may have done this already. Just type the country or city you're in into the comments box, because I really like to know where the teachers come from to come to our sessions. Okay, let's start first then by defining what we mean by this virtuous learning circle. Okay, so this graphic shows what we mean by a virtuous learning circle. Learners and teachers can use this kind of visual representation to set learning goals and to structure their progress. Let's start at the top. The first thing that any learner needs to establish is his or her learning objectives. Questions that learners should ask themselves are, what do I want to achieve in the short term and in the long term? These learning objectives will, of course, depend on the level of the student or class. And short-term objectives at beginner levels, for example, could be very simple. Just, I'm going to learn 3 words this week and use them in my speaking. And here we have a sample example learning objective. Now, the CEFR is a really good starting point for teachers to set appropriate goals and objectives, because this is for teachers, perhaps not for students yet, because it provides clear can-do statements for each proficiency level. And for those of you who are not familiar with the CEFR, at the end, we can talk about how you can find that on the web. Have a look at the document for the level that you teach and the skill that you're interested in. And here we have an example of a CEFR speaking descriptor at C1 level for informal discussion, because the CEFR is divided into different types of speaking or different types of listening and reading. And this could be an overall learning objective for learners at an advanced level. So let's read it out. Can easily follow and contribute to complex interactions between third parties in group discussions, even on abstract, complex and unfamiliar topics. So this task is calibrated to elicit advanced speaking skills at C1 level. You can see the aspects in the descriptor which increase the difficulty. They've been put in bold. So managing interaction with multiple speakers. Any of you who've been around the dinner table with your own families know that that can be sometimes difficult in your own language, leave alone a second language. So that's, the more speakers there are, the more difficult the task might be. Discuss abstract or unfamiliar topics rather than everyday conversation topics. Okay, so the next stage in the cycle is for the learners to perform in some way. So if we stick with that previous learning objective, the teacher may ask the students to have a discussions in pairs or threes about a complex topic. A suitable task for them may be to have a discussion and to reach some kind of conclusion or make a decision. For example, because that C1 descriptor includes unfamiliar topics, we can introduce a degree of unexpectedness or unfamiliarity into the task. So the teacher might ask students to draw a topic out of a hat and share their opinions on this subject for an agreed period of time. So something that they couldn't prepare for, and an unexpected topic, so that increases the difficulty. While the learners perform the task, the teacher will need to observe what is happening. Questions might be, are the learners able to complete the task in the time given? What are their strengths and their weaknesses? And here the teacher may look at the range and accuracy of vocabulary, or the range of vocabulary they use, whether they can use specific vocabulary to the topic for this more difficult task. They can think about what they're doing well or not so well. For example, if we look at functions, some learners might have very good interpersonal skills, such as active listening or giving follow-up questions. And remember that Cambridge English Qualifications are based on a range of success criteria. So it's important to evaluate not just grammar and vocabulary, but also interactive or interactional skills and discourse skills too. So successful observation will include close monitoring and note-taking by the teacher. For example, again, if we think back to the C1 discussion task, which involves complex interaction, the teacher may notice that their learners are overusing the expression "in my opinion" and decide to introduce different phrases for expressing opinions, so that they've got a range of ways of expressing their opinion. I chose this example because when I did an MA many years ago, I looked at my Italian students, how they use these expressions for interpersonal skills, and I found that they loved using "in my opinion" at the beginning of sentence. So I would try and get them to look out for different ways of expressing their opinion strongly or maybe more tentatively. As well, teachers might notice that students lack the specific vocabulary for the topic and suggest ways of boosting their vocabulary. They could do something like go home and assign topics to students, get them to generate some vocabulary, bring them in and share them with the class. So they are dividing the work between them, and everybody's bringing more vocabulary on different topics and they can share them. When the students have completed their task, the teacher has concluded their observation, both the teachers and learners can work on the analysis or interpretation of the performance and get to the feedback stage. So feedback's really important, of course, in learning, as we all know, and that's what drives learning forward. It can take many forms and it can focus on different aspects of performance. The teacher can feedback immediately after the task or just after the observation, or they may decide to give delayed feedback. One form of feedback is to give the learner time to reflect on their performance. How did it go overall? Did they manage to reach their goal? If you're teaching higher levels, like an intermediate group, you could ask learners to record themselves and complete a full observation stage first using a checklist. And then if you have lower level students, use a checklist for those, which is easier, just to tick a box. They can identify in very simple visual what they think they did well and what they want to improve. Another example for the interpersonal skills, it may become obvious to the teacher that the students only use the same phrase for making suggestions. Why don't we go to the cinema? And of course, there are lots of different ways of using suggestions. So they may decide to encourage their students to expand their repertoire here. Or there may have been issues with pronunciation that the teacher wants to draw attention to. And of course, don't forget that the teacher can also comment on the successful aspects of performance. And they could ask students to find other alternatives for homework and share them in a follow-up session in class. So involving the students in the feedback and getting them to set learner goals and bringing them into class. The adjustment of the teaching cycle will directly inform what new learning objectives should be set. So this is what happens in many classrooms around the world and probably happens in your own classrooms. So how do the exams fit in? Okay. Right, so have a look now at this example task from our C1 Advanced Speaking Test, which the Cambridge C1 Advanced exam, and this is part of the speaking test. And this is an interactive task, and it's designed to elicit speaking skills for interaction in professional and academic contexts. So test takers take this test in this task or the speaking test in 2s and sometimes 3. And here you have an example task. They're given a visual which acts as a prompt for discussion. And here they have a mind map with different life decisions, and they have to discuss the question in the center. Notice that the mind map is written, so they've got a written prompt, and that actually increases the difficulty of the task for learners at this higher level. So the prompt is in the middle. What might people have to consider when making these decisions? So, and then you've got the different suggestions in the spider graph. So choosing a university, starting a family, that's probably hypothetical for many of them, moving to another country, getting married and finding a job. So they have to focus on these decisions or these kinds of life events and think about decision making in those. So in the first part of the task, students have to discuss each of the life decisions and hypothesize and evaluate their relative difficulty. And then they're asked to decide together in which of the situations it is more important to make the right decision. So this part of the exam involves evaluation and interpersonal skills. When the students make suggestions and disagree, they need to do this politely. They need to take turns and make sure they get their turn. And finally, they have to reach a decision on which is the more they have to reach a decision, and this is perhaps the more goal-oriented aspect of the task in real life. So, and you can see how these skills might be relevant to real life language use over a number of domains. They can make learning and these can make learning and preparing for the exam very motivating for learners. I remember when I used to teach in Italy and my students did CEQs and they came out of the speaking test feeling really good. Said, I really felt as if I was using my English there. They could see the relevance of it. And of course, that's very motivating. And here's a reminder again quickly of that learning objective that the teacher set. And it comes again from the C1 speaking descriptors of the CEFR. And can I just ask you to again have a look at the learning objective and just identify the key words in the descriptor which calibrate the difficulty of the task in this advanced level. If you want, you can type this into the chat box for us to look at later. If not, I'll just give you a couple of minutes and we'll think about it together. So there you have the CEFR descriptor and the task. And again, think about what aspects of the task make this more of the prompt and what they have to do, create the difficulty of the task. Okay. Okay, sorry, I went on a slide too much. So we've got them, in fact, highlighted on the slide. So you've got them highlighted, can easily follow, So, you know, that suggests being a good listener, and listening, it's argued, is part of speaking skills. So if they can follow the sort of multi-party conversation easily, that's a sign of their ability. And it's the more people, as we said, the more difficult it is. And then contribute, and contributor means getting your turn as well, not only having something to say, but managing to get a piece of the action politely. And then again, the subject area, when they're abstract and complex and unfamiliar, that too increases the difficulty. So again, this is a test task that really elicits real life skills that you can use after the test. Okay, now we're going to look at another speaking task, but this one is from our A2 key exam. Now, this exam was revised last year after we'd collected teacher feedback, and it used to have an old information gap, like a jigsaw activity, speaking activity, and this has now been replaced by this picture prompt. And here, this picture prompt, as you see, elicits a simple exchange on habits and preferences. So, do you like these different hobbies? And there are visual depictions of the hobbies. Note that here they've got pictures, because if they had words, like in the C1 exam, that would increase the difficulty. They'd have to be reading as well as speaking. This is very low level, so we've got a picture prompt to lessen the cognitive load. So this is a good example of how task design can foster learning pathways. And this very simple but collaborative discussion provides greater opportunities for candidates to show their speaking ability and to develop their interactive speaking skills. So the students are speaking in pairs. In this example, they discuss whether they like the hobbies in the pictures. You've got watching television, reading, painting, playing football or sport, and playing an instrument. Okay. So the task has a clear focus on fluency and interaction. It's an authentic exchange. Children do this all the time, or young people do this all the time. I was once at a bus stop in Cambridge, and I heard a pair of young people, boy and a girl, maybe they were about 14 or 15, talking at the bus stop. They were both foreign students studying, and they were just speaking, asking each other questions, perhaps not quite about hobbies like this, about what they like doing in their free time. But again, these very simple exchanges are important for being able to build relationships and get to know people in new culture. So very, very relevant. So the task has a clear focus on fluency and interaction, and it's an authentic exchange. And in terms of the format, it's very clearly aligned with the A2 exam. So any student who progresses through the Cambridge exams at the different CEFR levels will be familiar with this type of speaking task. You can see at this elementary level, the subject is more concrete and the task is based on familiar topics with scaffolding provided in the instructions. First, they discuss whether they like the hobbies or not and say why they like or dislike them. And they'll also be prompted by the examiner to extend what they say with questions like, do you think painting is easy? Why not? So there's a lot of scaffolding, but also a focus on interaction and genuine communication. For example, responding to opinions and turn taking. So even at this very low elementary level, learners can develop speaking skills which are relevant to real life beyond the classroom. And this can be very, very motivating and engaging. Now I'm going to see if I can get the tech to work here. Let's look at a listening task from one of our tests. Listen to the recording, and then if you want, you can type in what level and age group you think this is aimed at. Fingers crossed that it goes well. Okay, and I haven't got the answer, but okay, let's see if we can, you can guess what answer this is. This is a pre-A1 test, so it's aimed at beginners, absolute beginners, and it's been specifically designed for young children. The previous example included images in black and white, as you remember, but we know that for young learners, colourful images are more appealing and easier to process. All of our young learner materials include colour images, and if a teacher uses these in the classroom, we are confident that they're accessible for children and that they enjoy working with them. And as we've mentioned before, we design our tests carefully so that preparing for them has a positive impact on the learners. Now let's have a look at an example of a reading task. This one comes from a B1 reading test, and this is a general English test aimed at anyone over the age of 16. And this kind of notice comes from the general English domain. You don't need specialist knowledge to understand it. So I'll just read out the notice. Babysitter wanted for 2 children, every Tuesday evening, some Wednesday evenings, experience essential and must have own transport. Ring Carol to find out what's involved. So that's the kind of message that you see in the small ads or perhaps online these days when people are looking for help or work. So test takers have to read this notice and choose which of the opposites in the 3 options matches the meaning of the notice. Now have a look at the example and think about what type of language knowledge is tested here. The language here is varied. You'll need to understand modals of necessity, must, can, some determiners, every, some, and have some lexical knowledge. Phrases like experience essential, you need to be able to work out what that means. This language is all part of a context, in this case, a short notice advertising a job. And all of the language that we use in our tests is presented in context because that's how language is used and encountered in real life. Now let's look at a writing task from one of our business English exams, B2 Beck Vantage. Can you all see that? I'll read it out for you. You are a regional sales manager for an international company. You have been asked to, let me just get rid of my, to go to a meeting at your company's head office. You cannot go, so someone else will go in your place. And then there's the task underneath. So that's the setup, the prompt actually. And here you have the task, what the learner has to do. Write an email to Erica Young, who is organising the meeting, apologising for not being able to go to the meeting, explaining why you cannot go, and saying who will go. Write 40 to 50 words, write on the opposite page. Okay, so you can see that this again is higher level, but B1, so not super high. They've given a word count. The prompt with the 3 bullet points is sort of helping the students to organise their piece of writing. And the skills that are tested are structuring an email. So writing your information in the right way, in the way that the reader would expect. Using appropriate language for a semi-formal context. This isn't a letter to a friend. Even the language in the input is slightly formal, apologising. So you have to, the test taker has to think about the right kind of language to use in this setting. And in terms of functions, they have to apologise, and we know that apologising can be quite difficult, but the good news is that English people apologise all the time. So if you come to England, you'll hear a lot of different ways of apologising. So they have to apologise, they have to explain why they can't go, and then they have to say who will go. So if you wanted your students to improve one or several of those skills, but not in a business setting, what could you ask them to do? This is a business task, but the same task could be converted to a more general domain or an educational domain. So you could convert the task to a social context by making it an apology for changing a social arrangement and suggesting an alternative date or venue. So the examples that we've seen today illustrate how Cambridge English qualifications and exams can help both learners and teachers to progress forward through the CEFR, through the levels, so from A1, A2, B1, B2, and so on, but they also help them to progress sideways in different contexts. So a student may decide to take a general exam and then do the same level as a business exam. So there is progression not only forwards but sideways into different contexts. And just as the CEFR builds on each level, so do our exams. A learner who has successfully completed A2 key or A2 flyers will have the skills to start preparing for B1 preliminary. You can see the stepped approach there. The tasks will also be familiar, as we've seen. The speaking tasks are quite similar in format, even though they increase in difficulty, but the task design is quite similar. And they'll have a good foundation in all skills which they can build on. And all of this is consolidation in language learning. So learners are building on what they've learned before and are getting ready for the next stage. Now then, this chart makes the progression as well as the different contexts clear. So we offer exams specifically aimed at learners who are still at school, who are in higher education, or need general English work, general English, and we also provide exams for those who need English for work. And each exam is closely aligned to one level of the CEFR, as you can see in the left-hand column, but they're also aligned to the levels above and below in terms of how they are structured. And we saw this in the previous examples where the A2 and C1 speaking tests have a similar format, but are graded in difficulty in terms of what the learners have to do with the language. As we saw, the A2 paired speaking is situated in the very familiar domain of social interaction, where candidates talk about topics of immediate personal interest, whereas at C1, they can take part in a complex discussion on abstract topics, often in a goal-oriented task, which is commonly found in a work or educational setting. Now here you can see an example of our certificates. Our certificates are much more than a grade or a mark to certified learning. They metaphorically point backwards in time to give a reliable statement about what language level the person has achieved, but they also point forward implicitly to the next stage of learning and to the next level that can be achieved and all the learning goals associated with that. In that way, they function as a language learning ladder, which can be manageable, gradual, and very motivating. Here we have our Young Learner certificate on the right. It's a mover certificate. It might have changed slightly. Oh no, we've got the monkeys on that. That's okay. It's the most up-to-date one. There's no pass or fail in our Young Learner certificates. All children receive an award which shows how many shields they have earned. So the maximum score is 5 shields for each part of the test: listening, reading, and writing, and speaking. And these tests celebrate children's achievement and build their confidence and reward children's individual achievement. We give feedback to parents and teachers as well. A result of 1 shield means that a child can improve a lot in that skill. Whereas 5 shields mean that the child did very well in that skill and answered most questions correctly. So in this statement, the child really did really well on reading and writing, reasonably well on speaking, and so-so on listening. All of our certificates too come with a statement of results. Candidates receive a score for each skill: reading, writing, listening and speaking, and in some exams, use of English. And they also get an overall score for the exam on the Cambridge English scale. And the alignment of our exams to the CFR is clear. Results on the scale also give greater insights into candidate progression from one exam to the next. The statement of results can give useful information for learners at an individual level and allow them to set goals for the next stage of their learning. But it can also give the teacher information at class level if their class has all done an exam, and allow them to calibrate their teaching. And again, when I was teaching in Italy, I was teaching higher level students C1 and C2. And if after an exam session, when the students had their statement of results, if they'd all got slightly lower marks in writing, I remember thinking to myself, I obviously need to put more input into writing in my next class, because it seemed that it was a generalized outcome for the whole class. So the statement of results can give both the individual and the teacher very important information. So we've looked at how good teaching and good assessment can go hand in hand together to form a virtuous circle of learning. Our tests are designed to have a positive impact on learning and elicit real-life skills which are relevant to real-life situations. And this is important. Our tests help learners to use English in real situation, and in that sense have a real impact on people's lives, the positive impact by design. They point backwards in giving a reliable measure of the learner's progress so far, and they point forwards to their next learning goals, what they should be. And in this way, they help the learners and their teachers help set relevant and realistic learning goals for the class. And they also motivate learners to set goals for themselves, those very self-directed ones. And finally, and most importantly, they're motivating for learners because they help them use real-life language skills. Okay, that's the end of this presentation. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm very happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Sian. Thank you for such an interesting session.
I'm just going to come out now of the, where am I?
Out of the presentation, then we can see you when we get to the questions. So yeah, we will dive into those questions. If anyone does have any questions for Sian, please put them in the Q&A box and we'll answer as many as we can. So I'm just taking a first look now. We've got a question from Elena. Is B2 First to Schools an academic or general English exam?
B2 First for Schools? Well, it can be used actually, because with exams we have to talk about how they're used. It's a general exam, and it's not sort of, the tasks are not academic tasks, but it does assess English at a fairly competent level. And in that sense, I've known it to be used in university faculties abroad as a certification of, for example, if you've got a B2 general English, you can probably manage in a pre-sessional class at pre-sessionals to go to university in Britain, or in certain lower level academic settings. So B2 isn't intended to be used as an academic exam, but it can be used because it certifies a good level of ability. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you, Sian. Okay, we've got another question here. How different are Ielts scores versus CEFR scores? What's the difference between them?
I mean, I know that the Ielts, exam is calibrated to the CEFR. So I think that they suggest what each IELTS score, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, how they relate to the CEFR. So I think they are already aligned to them. And that should be available in documentation that's public available for the public.
Yeah, I mean, if you check on the Cambridge English website, cambridgeenglish.org, you should be able to find information on that and how the different exams correlate. Okay, do we have any other questions for Sian? I've got one that popped into the chat earlier, Sian, which is, could Cambridge give some info on marking A2 and B1 questions papers?
Okay, again, there's lots of material, free downloadable material online. So if you go on to your favorite search engine and put in, say you want to have information on B1 preliminary, you tap that in and make sure that you get the Cambridge organisation, and not, because you get a lot of schools which do preparation. So make sure that you get the Cambridge organisation site, and there's a lot of material available for sample tasks. They give examples of assessment criteria or mark schemes with sample writing and speaking, for example, and commentaries. So there's a lot of very helpful material for teachers out there, and for individual students as well, who might want to just learn it on their own.
Yeah. Okay, and we've got a question here from Angelina. How often can summative tests be given for beginners? Interesting.
Well, it depends on, again, tests give you very useful information about the class learning and individual learning. So, I mean, I would say that if you've got some informal checks, rather than present them as a summative test, which with consequences. So if it's a sort of presented in a way, let's find out how much you've learned and whether we need to do a bit more. In a sense, even informal lessons in class can be summative, because a teacher is always listening to the students or looking at their work and mentally thinking about what they know and what they don't know. So rather than a summative test, it's just any kind of way that you elicit performance and make a sort of informal evaluation of it. That in itself is giving you information. So I think sort of very discrete summative tests take place all the time.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, this is a rather big question. What is the most important thing about an exam to be teaching? Guessing that means, what should you focus on most when teaching to an exam?
Well, my personal advice would be, you don't think about what you're trying to do in exam, especially our exams are very communicative, so it's easy to do in a Cambridge exam. So what you want to do with the exam is go in and communicate, achieve your communicative goal as well as you can, and don't get hung up about having every single word spelt correctly. I mean, obviously it's nice if you do, but we don't just look at accuracy, we look at how people use language and how successful their communication is, because that's, at the end of the day, is what's most important to do after the exam. People aren't listening to your mistakes when you're at the bus stop, they're listening to what you say. So I would say, do as well as you can. Remember, it's about communication, good communication, rather than a grammar test, because a lot of students get a bit hung up about, I mustn't make a mistake, they'll be looking for errors. They don't look only for errors. I mean, if there are a lot, that will perhaps, you'll have a slightly lower mark with your grammar, but there's so much more to communication than just grammar and vocabulary.
Yeah.
So that makes the test worthwhile, because it's, as I said throughout the presentation, it's not just passing an exam, it's what it enables you to do after.
Yeah. Okay, we've got one more question I think we've got time for. There's actually 3 questions here in the chat, which I think I can sum up as how would you compare different tests, for example, Cambridge exams to other exams, and decide which is appropriate for your students and your situation?
Well, again, it's I think I'm obviously biased, but I really do think that Cambridge tests are very balanced and complete, in the sense that they do get people to produce language rather than just tick boxes, and I think that's one of their unique. It's one of our unique selling points in terms of our speaking tests. Again, it's what you want to use the test results for. If it's a low stakes exam, just to, or if you just want to get certified for a certain job, and there's a cheaper exam out there, they just want B2 on the exam, you could do it. I think for things like university access and more sort of serious uses of exam, and in order to know that you've got a good, reliable score, our exams are probably the best ones to use, and recognised as well, because it's an example of recognition too.
Yeah.
It's hard to answer that question.
It's hard to answer that in an unbiased way.
Yes, exactly. Yes, but you know, I mean, I really do believe what I've just said. So yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, Sian.
Well, thank you for having me. Thank you for attending, everyone.
Yeah, that's all we've got time for. Really interesting presentation. And thank you to all of you who have joined us today for the Global Schools Festival.